what a year. 2021 was basically 2020 but with far higher highs and lows, and musically it was one of the most chaotic years I've ever experienced in my life. Everyone was releasing their lockdown/post-lockdown records that they didn't put out in 2020, leading to every musician you can name putting out records this year. For me, the year was personally very taxing, meaning I found myself devoting more time to listening to music I already loved as a comfort, meaning that I only had a certain amount of attention to give when it came to new releases. So there are a lot of big albums that people are raving about that I still haven't had the chance to check out. Anyway, let's get straight into it. These are my top 30 favourite albums of 2021.
No more promos, no more photos, no more logos, no more...
Oof, this is gonna be a controversial one considering how many people hate this album. This is far from a perfect album. In fact, this is a heavily flawed album. It's overly long, many of the songs are embarrassingly bad, and despite being a love letter to Kanye's deceased mother, so much of the record comes off as a huge ego trip. But it also contains some of the darkest and most introspective music Kanye has ever written. It's musically at times incredibly bare and empty, and at other times as maximalist and self-aggrandizing as you'd expect from a Kanye record. The album is at its best when Kanye's exploring his divorce, his life, and his struggles with mental health. While Jesus is King was Kanye on a huge bipolar high, Donda shows him at his lowest. The album is constantly heart-wrenching, and the music perfectly complements that with its dour atmospheric sounds and intentional lack of percussion. As I said, this album is not perfect. There was no need to add the second parts of songs on the album. The Baby and Marilyn Manson being on the album is a baffling decision, and the decision to only put Life at the Party on the deluxe edition is also incredibly confusing considering it's the best song of the entire album cycle. But the album shows Kanye at its most Kanye. It's vulnerable, dark, and incredibly messy, but I'd want nothing less.
Oh, so illogical, I'm not magical, I can't read your mind. How can you know?
Do you guys ever refuse to listen to a musician because you have an ex who used to listen to him all the time and they've now ruined the music for you? That's how I felt about Dodie for the longest time. But because I'd heard such great things about her debut full-length Build a Problem, I decided to grow up and give it a chance. And I'm glad I did because this album is beautiful. An incredibly intimate, intricate folk record with incredibly luscious and beautiful melodies. The album is an honest and at times bitter record with really fantastic production and lyricism. Dodie's open and self-explorative lyrical style is at its best on this record. The track Hate Myself is an anxious track about passive aggression with a triumphant and catchy hook. Cool Girl is one of the most beautiful and memorable tracks on the record. A track inspired by Gone Girl, the lyrics see the narrator pretending to be someone they're not to make a significant other happy. It's a fragile, simple, and empty song, but its luscious string sections and Dodie's broken and falsetto heavy vocals keep it going. While musical, there's little here that is completely groundbreaking or new. It's her vocals and incredible songwriting that keeps the album engaging. It's incredibly intimate, luscious, and small, but every song is infectious and memorable. There are a lot of incredibly catchy sing-along moments, but there are also many heartbreaking, emotionally bare moments also. The Guardian described it as being nothing beyond mere John Lewis ad-style twee acoustic pop, and while I don't completely disagree with that, I think his songwriting elevates it, and yeah, I just think it's a really beautiful album. Sleep Token are easily one of the most fascinating and strange bands in the metal scene currently. Similar to Ghost, the band's identity is hidden and they perform as if they're the head of a religion. Their music is a blend of post-metal, electronica, and dream pop to create this very vast musical landscape. Their sophomore album, This Place Will Become Your Tomb, is not quite as inventive and unique as their debut album Sundowning, but it still delivers the band's signature serene and frantic sound. The album is filled with incredibly fuzzy and explosive guitars which are complemented by the delicate and layered synths. Songs like Hypnosis and Telomeres are accentuated by this huge shoegazy-esque soundscape that shows clear influence from bands like Deftones. Songs like the opening track Atlantic, The Love You Want, and Alkaline show the band's fantastic knack for pop songwriting and how they blend heavy melody and pop production with heavy guitars and drums. Frontman Vessel's vocals are fantastic throughout with his tender and solemn delivery, catchy and memorable melodies, and beautifully haunting poetic lyricism, making him stand out as one of the genre's most exciting contemporary frontmen. Where the album is at its most exciting is when the band are completely reinventing themselves and making stuff that sounds unlike anything they've done yet. Fall For Me is an a cappella track sung with heavy autotune giving strong Imogen Heap vibes, and my personal favourite on the album, Descending, is an incredibly haunting, bleak electronic song with a strong trap-inspired beat. This is a band that are gaining more and more traction, and I'm really excited to see where they go next. Electronic musician Porter Robinson's first record in 7 years, Nurture is one of the most unique, exciting and strange electronic albums I heard all year. A constantly frantic record that takes musical influences from all over the place, the album is constantly vivid and fascinating. Their instrumentation is constantly competing against itself, and there are very few points where Robinson plays it safe. Moments like Look at the Sky and Get Your Wish definitely sound cut from that early 2010s EDM cloth that his early material was, but there's much more substance and personality in there. Robinson's melodies and hooks are incredibly catchy, keeping the album a sugary delight. The scale of influences appears to be all over the place, with some songs sounding like a song from a Japanese video game, and others sounding like they could have been ripped from a late career Bon Iver album. Robinson's pitch-shifted vocals make the album sound like a hyperpop record at times, but it feels much more melodic and less abrasive than it does on something like a 100 Gex record. In the album's most experimental moments like the glitchy dull scythe, Robinson takes the album in some of the most exciting, surreal and interesting directions. Although the album is too long and at times can be a little bit repetitive, this is one of the most interesting records I heard all year, and one I definitely recommend to all electronica fans.
I'm not your friend or anything, damn. You think
Billie Eilish's debut was my favourite album of 2019, and while her sophomore record isn't quite as good, it's still a really solid record. Stripping away much of the industrial hip-hop sound of the first record and replacing it with more sparse, jazz-sounding electro-pop sounds, the album shows Eilish dealing with becoming an adult and a huge star at the same time. Much of the lyrical content shows her discussing the struggles of being a young woman in the entertainment industry and the emotional abuse and misogyny that goes alongside it. But as well as this, Eilish spends a lot of time on the album discussing the end of a relationship and getting out of it stronger than ever. Moments like the ambient R&B ballad My Future show her delving into the idea of self-love. The raw lyrics and atmospheric sleepy vocals deliver some of the most beautiful and poignant moments on the album, while alternatively the title track begins with a jazzy acoustic sound before exploding into a cathartic pop-punk explosion of frustration and emotion. Much of the album is much more minimalistic and down-tempo compared to the predecessor, feeling far more reflective and at times harrowing. Eilish and her brother Phineas constantly experiment with different sounds and influences, creating an album far more musically diverse than her previous record. NDA is unlike anything she's done to date, with its aggressive dark pop sound that sounds like it could have been ripped directly from the first Fever Ray album. This then leads into Therefore I Am, a song that has that hip-hop R&B sound from her first album with far more confident and mature lyrics. The album's biggest downfall, I think, is how bloated it feels. Its 56 minutes, 16 song track list feels unnecessarily long and sadly brings down the experience of the album. Had it been 3 or 4 songs working on, we'd have a far better and more exciting album. But that being said, this is still a really good record and one filled with some of my favourite songs of the year. I wouldn't even completely rule out this album growing on me much more in the future, but for now, I think its place here is fitting. Now, where the fuck did this album come from? Weezer have been on a massive low recently. Every album since the White Album has been incredibly bad, but it's kind of expected from them at this point. So for this surprise album to not only be good, but to be completely different tonally from anything they've done to date was a complete shock to I think everyone in the universe. The album shows the band working with a 38-piece orchestra to make a grandiose orchestral pop record. The album blends acoustic guitars, pianos, organs, and orchestral sound on what is musically the band's most beautiful work to date. The melodies and lyrics are signature Weezer, with Rivers Cuomo discussing escapism and the feeling of isolation and depression. The lyrics are easily the darkest and most personal since Pinkerton, and they're perfectly contrasted by the extravagant and luscious arrangements. All my favourite songs and Grapes of Wrath are the band at their most fun and charming, while on the other side of the spectrum, Numbers and Bird with a Broken Wing are some of the barest and most emotional tracks the band have ever written. The album is filled with passion and joy, something that has completely been devoid from the band's music for quite a while. It's exciting to see the band take risks and do something completely fresh and new rather than desperately try to stay relevant. Let's hope this isn't the band's last great album, but considering they also put out Van Weezer this year, I'm starting to be very skeptical on that front. UK electronic duo Jungle's third album, Loving in Stereo, is easily their best record to date in my personal opinion. Blending the neo-soul funk sound of their earlier records with elements of hip-hop and house, the album is incredibly infectious, bouncy and fun. Musically incredibly diverse, the tracks bounce around different sounds and styles while still having a unified dance floor sound. Songs like Romeo, Fire and What You Know About Me are dance anthems begging to be played at a packed party filled with bodies moving. Romeo shows the band divert into hip-hop sounds, with rapper Baz rapping over an incredible beat with an old soul sample, giving me strong early Kanye West vibes. All of the Time is a much subtler and more melodic track with this old school gospel vibe, and with the song Truth, the band basically make an indie rock track that sounds like something that could have been on Arcade Fire's Everything Now. The album's production is easily its strongest point, with the instrumentation and at times almost psychedelic sounds blending perfectly with the rhythmic and groovy vibe of the tracks. The usage of vintage synthesizers mixed with modern day production and punchy acid jazz-esque bass lines keep the album an incredibly infectious and exciting experience. It was easily my favorite dance album this year, and I cannot recommend it enough. I'm admittedly very late to the Architects party, but what a place to start. For those who wish to exist is Architects firing on all cylinders, delivering an incredibly visceral and epic slice of symphonic metalcore. Building on the grand and larger-than-life feel of Holy Hell, the band make an album that sounds aggressive, yet is filled with such joy and passion. The album embraces a wide array of sounds with elements of EDM and classical music, helping it stand out as one of the most refreshing and exciting albums the metal scene had to offer this year. Inspired by the events of 2020 and the looming threats to the future of mankind, the album ponders what we can do to incite change and sustain human life. All of this above some of the most exciting and fresh instrumentation and production shown on any of the band's albums to date. They're constantly proving that they're striving to grow and take risks, and very few of them fall flat. The industrial-inspired and Ordinary Extinction shows this perfectly, with its heavy usage of synths and high vocal melodies that show off just how incredibly powerful Sam Carter's voice can be. The guest spots from Parkway Drive's Winston McCall, Royal Blood's Mike Kerr, Biffy Clyro's Simon Neil, and Black Peaks' Liam Curley help make the album a triumphant celebration of the modern rock scene. Not to mention that all of them kill it on their respective slots. It's always great to hear Simon Neil's unclean vocals, as they seem to kind of be a thing of the past. While I don't think the album quite reaches the emotional and melodic heights of Holy Hell, this is still a great album and an essential listen for anyone into the British rock or metal scene.
Double locked titanium steel. Curtains closed.
It wouldn't be one of my year-end lists without an album from this current post-punk revival wave we're going through. Shame's sophomore album Drunk Tank Pink is a wild, surreal and incredibly confident display of desperation and frustration. The album shows the band embracing a wide array of sounds, showing clear influence from world music and Talking Heads, but without losing the band's edge. They're more confrontational than ever, with songs like Alphabet and Harsh Degrees being these vicious, biting songs inspired by the band's constant tour cycles. Born in Luton is easily my favourite song the band have ever done, with its almost math rock-esque progression and usage of loop/synth sounds that sound ripped from the more experimental tracks from Talking Heads' Remaining Light. The instrumentation throughout is great, with guitar riffs being loud and urgent, the drums and bass adding this insane groove, and the dissonant synths and weird sounds adding this incredibly vast collage of sounds to the album's sonic palette. Frontman Charlie Steen proves himself as one of the most captivating frontmen and poets in the current British post-punk scene, with his anxious lyrics and confident delivery being constantly contagious. The album is a vigorous, exciting, and at times violent record, but deft in its delivery. It was my introduction to the band, and I can't wait to properly dive into their back catalogue and their future output also. When I heard that Bruno Mars and Anderson .Paak were teaming up to make a collab album, I was surprised that they'd never done anything together before. Both artists have shown clear influence from classic R&B and funk throughout their careers, so this record kind of made perfect sense. The record is very short and to the point, meaning it flies by. Each song feels necessary to the record and are fun, nostalgic, incredibly romantic love letters to Motown and soul. Songs like the luscious Leave the Door Open and Lavish Smoking Out the Window show the duo playfully singing these super catchy throwback tracks that do a great job of standing on their own without ever falling into pastiche territories. The duo show an incredible level of confidence and showmanship, which keeps the album constantly fun and infectious. Tracks like Fly As Me show this off perfectly, with Anderson .Paak's signature mix of singing and rapping adding to the confident, self-indulgent lyrics about how lucky a woman would be to get with either of them. Mars and .Paak have great chemistry for a while and perfectly jump off each other, playing to each other's strengths. Their performances and songwriting are incredibly charismatic, filled with a strong theatrical sense of humour and clear attention to detail. The instrumentation and production are easily some of the richest and sweetest I've heard all year. This isn't an album for everyone, but if you're a fan of that 70s Motown funk sound, then this is essential listening, I think.
It's a Tokyo bouncy ball, it's an Oslo bouncy ball, it's a Rio de Janeiro bouncy.
One of the most fun post-punk records of the year, Dry Cleaning's debut may not completely reinvent the wheel, but it brings so many great elements together into something poetic and at times hilarious. Frontwoman Florence Shaw's lyrics are incredibly surreal and have a strange conversational stream of consciousness style. Her spoken word delivery may seem like it could get a bit dull and repetitive after a while, and maybe at some points in the album it does a bit, but her unique blend of found text writing and lacerating postmodern poetry keeps it interesting at least. Below her vocals are riff-heavy, jangly guitars, punchy Gang of Four-esque bass lines, and at times jazz-inspired drum lines. Musically, the band switch between different influences, with some songs sounding like classic post-punk and others being more in line with the more garage-inspired 2000 post-punk revival sound. But they do it in such a way that it never sounds muddled or that they're trying to copy someone else. While many modern post-punk bands encapsulate a heavy, frustrated and angry sound, Dry Cleaning are much more sardonic and sarcastic in tone. The portraits that Shaw paints are very vivid and constantly fascinating. She focuses on the most menial details to deliver an almost nihilistic feeling of dread. Her vocals are going to be what will either make you fall in love with the band or make you hate them, because they're certainly an acquired taste. But I think they're super unique and interesting. The band and vocals meld together in such a fascinating and artistic way that even despite not being the most original or fresh band in the genre, they at least come off as one of the most complete and well defined. Frank Carter and the Rattlesnakes have been a band that I've always had a very mixed relationship with. Their debut, Blossom, is a great hardcore punk record, but Modern Ruin and End of Suffering for me felt quite lacking. Both are filled with really catchy and fun alt-rock bangers, but also filled with a lot of unmemorable filler. But their fourth album, Sticky, seems like a conscious decision to strip back and make their most to the point and straightforward recording to date, something they succeeded at doing. Every song is a fun, exciting blast of energy, with Carter's biting lyrics and knack for writing great pop choruses shining everywhere. The frustration of living through a lockdown and being isolated is shown throughout, with tracks like the title track and Go Get a Tattoo being direct responses to this. The title track tackles this feeling darkly and psychologically, showing the direct effect that being stuck and away from those you love can have from you. And Go Get a Tattoo is a party anthem about feeling free and limitless, but aware that it all could be taken away again. Rat Race is similarly about the lockdown and the deep toll that repeating the same day can have on someone, but Carter also managed to recapture the romantic storytelling that his last couple albums were filled with on songs like Cupid's Arrow, this song about the anxieties of unrequited love. They also embrace outside collaborators on the album, bringing in Linked, Cassiette, Joe Talbot from Idols, and Bobby Gillespie from Primal Scream to provide guest vocals. All of them feel incredibly at home, especially Joe Talbot, who features on My Town, which could easily have been ripped from Idols' Ultra Mono record. Overall, this is a simple, fun alt-rock record with heavy punk influences. The instrumentation is all very simple but soothes the songs well, and Carter's lyricism and melodies are all top-notch. It never outstays its welcome and proves that in bite-sized chunks, this band can be something great.
Comparison is killing me slowly.
On paper, this album should have sucked. A pop-punk inspired album from someone best known for starring in High School Musical, the series, didn't sound like my cup of tea. But as soon as Good For You became the biggest song in the galaxy, I knew this album had the potential to turn out alright. Sour definitely is not the most original record in the world. It's like a hybrid of Lorde, Billie Eilish, Avril Lavigne and Taylor Swift. But it works well because Olivia Rodrigo's personality is self-aware and confidently honest. Rodrigo's songwriting is very adolescent, and she captures the feeling of confusion and teen angst that growing up in the social media age has caused for many her age. Songs like Brutal and Jealousy perfectly display this with their frustrated, self-deprecated tone and crisp 90s rock sound. Traitor, Driver's License, Happier and Hope You're Okay are incredibly soft and emotionally powerful breakup tracks with incredibly strong instrumentation and production. The production work from Dan Nigro is easily some of the best from any pop album this year. It's glossy, glitzy, and perfectly complements Rodrigo's songwriting, knowing when to strip down to the bare essentials and also knowing when to be much more maximalist. Deja Vu feels like the perfect middle ground with an almost psychedelic tone and with these huge synths and lo-fi guitar lines. The songs can at times be a little bit repetitive, and I do think she runs out of things to say about breakups pretty quickly on the record, but at its best, the album is catchy, charismatic, and filled with potential. It'll be interesting to see how her sophomore album is, and whether it holds up as well as this one, but only time will tell. This is an album I was not expecting to enjoy. In fact, had I made this video a few weeks earlier, it wouldn't be on the list. I found Biffy Clyro's recent output to be quite uninteresting, and nothing since Opposites grabbed me. And considering this album was a direct follow-up to their 2020 album A Celebration of Endings, one that I found incredibly forgettable, I had no expectations for this album. But somehow this album is a complete return to form for the band and shows them at their most visceral, exciting and emotional. The band described the album as a rapid emotional response to the turmoil of the past year, and that's something you can really feel throughout. Embracing the hard rock / math rock inspired sound of their classic material, this record is a euphoric blast of aggression, but with this strong layer of positivity stretching throughout the album's raucous lyrics. The band sound tighter and more inspired than they have in years, dropping the dull electro-pop sound of their previous couple records and giving the fans exactly what they want. Songs like A Hunger in Your Haunt show the band at their absolute best with these biting, self-motivating lyrics about reigniting the fire and getting out of a slump. The riffs, hook and blending of synths into the crushed vitriolic production hits harder than anything the band have produced in a decade. The track is easily one of their best songs today in my opinion, and is followed by the volatile Denier, in which the band sing about the sinisterness of abusers and the manipulative things they can do to their victims. In terms of mainstream rock, rock music, no one put out a more exciting, fun and creative record than Biffy this year. This is quite possibly the band's best album since Puzzle, and I'm hoping it's not just a fluke and that we get more great stuff to come. This is another album I was not really expecting a lot from, if I'm completely honest. I'd never heard of Angelo De Augustine, and although I love a lot of Sufjan Stevens' material, I really wasn't into his album The Ascension, didn't even bother with that 5-part ambient album he put out this year, and have never really enjoyed any of the collaborative albums he's done. But this album completely delivers upon everything I'd want from one of his albums. The album is a beautiful, vibrant, and extravagant slice of chamber folk filled with gorgeous lyricism, music, and vocal performances. Sufjan and Angelo's vocals perfectly blend together, and their harmonies make them sound as if they're being sung by one person. The album was written by the duo after they holed themselves up in a cabin and watched a bunch of movies. Each of the album's 14 songs are based on a different movie, something that, although could come off as incredibly gimmicky, works as a great jumping off point for the album's lyrics. The album is at times both bare and grandiose, showing off the duo's virtuosic multi-instrument talent. Much of the record comprises of acoustic guitars, drums, clean electric guitars and pianos, with occasional electronic sounds scattered throughout, like on the outro of the beautiful Lady Macbeth in Chains. The album's wide array of instrumentation keeps it constantly interesting without ever distracting from the lyrical content. The lyrics are all poetic and hypnotic, feeling philosophical and personal. While some bands would just retell the plot of a movie in song form, the pair instead put themselves in the shoes of the characters in the films and help explore the themes of each film instead. For example, the opening track Reach Out is based on Wings of Desire and shows the duo capturing that film's themes of isolation and mortality. You've also got The Pillar of Souls, which shows them taking the point of Pinhead and Hellraiser 3, which works far better than it should on paper. The duo's sincerity and confidence sell the album's execution and keeps it a constantly engaging and powerful experience. If you want a beautiful, simple and incredibly intelligent folk record, then look no further. Indie pop trio London Grammar's first album in 4 years shows the band updating their sound and progressing into new sonic territories. While the band's previous music was heavily indebted to dream pop and trip hop, this new record shows the band embracing electro pop and dance music a lot heavier than ever. The record constantly feels like the band taking heavy influence from working with Disclosure and Flume on the songs they did with both of them. Songs like Lose Your Head and How Does It Feel are huge dance pop bangers with super simplistic yet catchy hooks and groovy beats. However, the band do still retain that very surrealistic, hypnotic, dreamy sound and production style that they're known for, especially on the second half of the album where the band's mellow, emotive sound comes through heavier than ever. Tracks like I Need the Night in America are incredibly beautiful and retain the band's signature atmospheric sound. The production work is some of the band's best to date, with a great selection of different synth sounds, blending perfectly with the atmospheric guitars, pianos, and electronic drum sounds. Frontwoman Hannah Reid's vocals are as beautiful as ever, and her lyrics are as emotional, powerful, and personal as ever also. The hooks on the album are catchier than anything they've done before, and the songs are easily some of my favourites the band have done to date. While I'm not sure the album is quite as great as their debut, this is an incredibly strong and ambitious album for the band. I'm excited to see where they go next and see if they kind of expand down this route any further.
6 feet deep, like could have been so sweet, bro.
If you like music that makes you feel like you're lying in the sun with a cold drink in hand, then I highly recommend this record. Easy Life have been one of my favourite upcoming bands in the indie scene since I discovered their 2020 mixtape Junk Food. Their debut record is the perfect introduction to them as a band. Their music is like this unique blending of R&B, hip hop and indie pop that is filled with comedic displays of self-doubt, relationship struggles, as well as being youthful in the modern age. Frontman Murray Matraver's lyrics lyrics blend dark and light in an incredibly dry way, with him constantly juggling being a comedian and also a cynic. There's a great progression in the narrator's emotions throughout the album, starting much more positive and comedic before things go south. Lighter moments like Ocean View are incredibly vibey and capture the beauty of the summer. Murray sings about experiencing the beauty of the world and the taste and smell you can note when thinking about it. However, the dark shows strongly on the track Living Strange, in which he describes living through an incredibly depressive state and imagining a suicide attempt. The band's most popular song, Nightmares, shows him singing about anxiety and peer pressure over an incredibly funky and jazzy backing track. The band constantly blends dark lyrics with bright music, and it works together perfectly. The blending of different sounds and genres come together perfectly with a wide array of guitar sounds, synths, horns, and percussion sounds. The album is incredibly short and sweet, but its immediacy makes it really infectious. I had the pleasure of seeing the band at the first gig I went to post-lockdown, and it felt like hanging out with a group of friends, getting drunk, and just having a great time. And despite the album's pretty bleak lyricism, I think that also kind of sums up how the album feels.
Rolls Royce pull up, black boy hop out. Shout out to my mother and my father didn't pull out.
One of the things I love about music is that you can have a completely different experience every time you hear it. The first time I heard Call Me If You Get Lost, I didn't like it. I found it obnoxious and repetitive, and yeah, I just didn't gel with it. However, now I think it's one of the best albums Tyler the Creator's done to date. An incredibly schizophrenic collection of tracks blending elements of everything Tyler's done to date. Tyler's at the top of his game on this album, delivering banger after banger, never once bowing down or losing his energy or edge. The album pays homage to the mixtapes of the 2000s and features DJ Drama as the album's host, inspired by his Gangsta Grillz mixtape series. Musically, the album captures the looseness and see what sticks nature of the mixtape formula. The album feels very nostalgic and shows constant influence from 2000s hip-hop through its incredible production and music. Juggernaut sounds like it could have been taken straight from the first three The Carter albums, which makes a lot of sense considering Lil Wayne appears on the album. Tracks like Lumberjack are aggressive, chaotic, and explosive, while Matter is much more restrained with an R&B vibe. Tyler's lyrical prowess is as great as ever, stepping away from his usual style of creating characters and stories and rapping about his own life. Much of the album appears to satirize Tyler's fame and the idea of him being wealthy. Lumberjack seems to show Tyler overinflating his ego, rapping about his material wealth and addressing his haters over an incredibly abrasive, aggressive beat, which contrasts his usual melodic production style. The album feels incredibly self-aware, especially in its second half, in which Tyler raps about romance, particularly on the 8.5-minute Wiltshire, which shows him softly and emotively discussing a failed relationship. While I still think I prefer Igor, I think this is one of Tyler's most realised, interesting and definitive albums to date.
She flies to Paris, France. I come down into her childhood bed and write the words.
One of the most fascinating, unique, and exciting rock albums of the year, Black Country New Road's debut record is a frantic, schizophrenic musical odyssey. Blending elements of post-punk, jazz, and post-rock, there's never a moment on this record that's dull or samey. The album is ferocious and constantly inventive, with a sound that feels simultaneously improvised and carefully planned out. A lot of the songs are quite lengthy, but in a way that never feels bloated. The track Sunglasses is the perfect example of this, an epic 9.5-minute track that ebbs and flows through a variety of different sounds while retaining its burning intensity. Vocalist Isaac Wood's lyrics on the track deliver this incredibly poetic and descriptive style of storytelling that seems to be about a longing to change and dissatisfaction for oneself. The music on this track especially is chaotic and cacophonous, with the punky guitar lines and blaring free jazz saxophones. Musically, the entire album is mesmerizing, taking a sound that isn't completely original and diverting it into unexpected, fascinating and exciting territories. Woods' vocal delivery is incredibly versatile, switching from the anxious Conor Oberst wobbles and Sunglasses to the more confident deliveries on tracks like Athens, France. This is an album that is best enjoyed as one whole piece. Rarely do I find myself listening to just one song from the album without listening to it in full. It's one of the most boastful, adventurous and fresh albums I heard all year. If you're a fan of Black Midi's more chaotic rock stuff, then this comes highly recommended. Is this technically cheating? I don't care, this album's a hell of a lot of fun. The album is Jeff Rosenstock completely reworking his fantastic 2020 album No Dream into a ska punk record. It's filled with everything you'd expect from a ska album. The trumpets, bright plucky guitar lines, bells, keyboards, and Rosenstock shouting oi and hey a lot. On paper, the idea of a ska reworking of any album sounded like my hell, as I've always had a very love-hate relationship with the genre. But the album is an absolute joy, returning to Rosenstock's bomb the music industry roots. The songs perfectly fit the new sound, with their at times comedic social commentary blending super well with the album's most upbeat moments. But the album never loses the edge and clear sense of frustration that made No Dream great. The title track is possibly the record's most aggressive moment, completely diving into a hardcore sound as the track progresses. The Specials-esque horn line shows the album's production at its best, with delay-heavy guitars and trumpets giving the track a dark and atmospheric tone. The album is very self-aware and constantly tongue-in-cheek. The new rap on Scram from Bobosa is an incredibly out of nowhere but kind of hilarious addition to the track, but it never downplays the weight and seriousness of a lot of the lyrical content. It feels equal parts of fun goof and serious artistic exploration. I would love to see Rosenstock dive back into the genre again for another full length in the future, but for now, I'm super happy with this one.
Hey, I know I've been a little bit off in this moment.
Consistently dreamlike and vulnerable, Arlo Parks' songwriting is constantly extraordinary. On her debut, Collapsed in Sunbeams, Parks gives us a collection of diverse and complex stories that are consistently introspective and gripping. Blending elements of folk and R&B, the album's music works as the perfect bed for Parks' effortless lyricism, which she sings beautifully. Each song is incredibly descriptive as Parks sings about her past experiences and people in her life. For example, Hope, in which she sings about a friend who is isolated and depressed. The song For Violet is an almost trip-hop inspired song that shows her singing about the death of innocence and realizing the world is darker than you thought. One of the album's most beautiful and heartbreaking moments is the track Eugene, in which Parks details falling in love with her straight friend who is in a toxic relationship with a man named Eugene. It's super beautiful and catchy and tackles the feeling of jealousy and confusion that is incredibly universal and relatable, which is something that she does well all throughout, taking her own experiences and feelings and exploring them in beautiful, relatable vignettes. Her songwriting is filled with such complex emotion and maturity that it feels like it was written by someone who has lived multiple lifetimes. The music may not be super adventurous or original, but it allows her lyrics and vocals to shine. I've spoken a lot about her songwriting, but her vocal performances are just as beautiful, mixing elements of spoken word and showing off her jazzy vocal style perfectly. She is a musician who I think is massively on the rise, and I completely expect to blow up in the next few years. I've been a fan of Left at London for a couple years, so was looking forward to her debut record, and what a debut it was. TIA PFYH is a perfect introduction to Nat Puff's music, and easily her most accomplished, well-produced and eclectic project yet. Puff's knack for adopting a wide array of sounds has never been shown heavier here. The Ballad of Marian Zainchek is an indie folk track that was written as part of a planned, scrapped Sufjan Stevens-inspired concept album about Seattle. The song is an incredibly catchy and bare track about a politician from Washington and his public struggles with mental health in a society unable to treat him. Much of the album has clear hyperpop sounds with a heavy usage of auto-tuned, pitch-shifted vocals and abrasive production. Album closer, This Is a Protest for Your Heart, is a super abrasive, heavily distorted track with pitch-shifted vocals which make it sound like it could have come straight from a 100 Gex record. The opening track, Pills and Good Advice, is easily the best song Puff has written to date, a 3-part 10-minute suite that jumps through different styles and sounds, starting off as an acoustic song, evolving into a pop-punk track, and then morphing into a weird blend of indie rock and electronica. A powerful, beautiful, and at times heartbreaking track about Puff's struggles with depression and anxiety. It even samples Car Seat Headrest, making it the perfect song. Much of the album still retains the lo-fi qualities of Puff's previous material, but it feels far sharper. You can tell a lot more time, money, and effort has been put into the production and mixing on this record than anything she's released to date. There is a place for you here, and it could be better, especially have great production work and sound beautiful. Puff is probably best known for her meme videos on Vine and TikTok, which is a shame because her music is great also. She's one of my favourite underground artists working today, and I hope she gets more attention.
The kingdom's on fire, the blood of a young Messiah. I see sinners in a church, I see sinners in a church.
Man, I can't believe I was so late to the Little Sims train. If there's one good thing I can say about Venom 2 Let There Be Carnage, is that it made me want to check out her music, because for some reason she has a cameo in that movie. Still not really sure why that happened, but sure. Sometimes I Might Be Introvert is incredibly theatrical and ambitious, showing Sims firing on all cylinders. The music embraces elements of soul and R&B while being inspired by orchestral film scores. Tracks like the opener Introvert shows this with the huge James Bond-esque string stabs, as well as the interlude The Rapper That Came to Tea, which sounds ripped from an old Disney movie. Sims' lyrics are incredibly honest and confessional, showing her constantly trying to discover herself and what it takes to be her. She discusses intimate and important relationships throughout her life, including her troubled relationship with her father in the track I Love You, I Hate You. The track Woman is an homage to the women that inspired Sims. Little Q shows her skills as a storyteller incredibly well, as she writes from the perspective of her cousin growing up in South London and being a product of growing up in a violent environment that you don't fit in. Sims' vocal performance on the entire album is incredibly passionate and emotionally charged. Her flow is consistently great and she never misses a beat. She even shows off her singing abilities in the bouncy electro-funk track Protect My Energy. The production is fantastic, perfectly capturing the vulnerable nature of Sims' songwriting and turning it into a To Pimp a Butterfly-esque cinematic thrill ride. I cannot wait to check out more of Sims' stuff. In terms of mainstream pop/rap, no one had a better year I think than Lil Nas X. Had you asked me my thoughts on Lil Nas X in late 2018, early 2019, I would have said he would be a one-hit wonder whose one hit sucked and would be forgotten in a couple years. But somehow he not only endured, but he has gotten better and better with everything he's put out. The album is constantly confident, bold, and is filled with eclectic beats. Tracks like the title track Industry Baby and That's What I Want are instant earworms with the catchiest hooks from any song all year. Nas's vocal delivery is fantastic, blending singing with rap perfectly and using autotune to turn his voice into an instrument rather than as a way of covering up a lack of talent. Few musicians of Nas's stature are singing this openly and honestly about being gay, something that is incredibly inspiring to listen to. It's great to see him give so many people a voice, never being afraid to show off his flamboyance and to make his sexuality an overt part of his visual identity. The title track is especially sexually charged, with Nas rapping incredibly descriptive, explicit lyrics over a flamenco-inspired beat with syncopated claps. Much of the album takes influence from trap, which is shown in the down-tempo Sun Goes Down, in which Nas sings about growing up and not fitting in with his peers. The song is incredibly beautiful with super catchy melodies, a great clean guitar riff, and luscious string lines. Much of the album is incredibly anthemic and stadium filling, giving me strong Graduation vibes in its grandness. The Kanye-produced Industry Baby shows this perfectly with huge trumpets and 808 bass lines. If you're a fan of pop rap, then this album is about as poppy as rap can be. Consistently catchy sing-along tracks with memorable hooks, great luscious production, and fantastic songwriting. Congrats Lil Nas X, I never thought I'd become as big a fan as I am, but here we are. One of the most exciting and fresh hardcore punk albums of the past couple of decades, with Turnstile's third album, they embrace a wider sonic palette than ever before, blending the melodic hardcore sound they're known for with elements of dream pop, shoegaze, R&B, rap, post-punk and grunge, just to name a few. Glow On is an album that never for 1 second gets boring. The album is a visceral treat filled with some of the most dynamic and experimental sonic palettes I've heard on a hardcore album album since Minutemen were around. Songs like Don't Play and Turnstile Love Connection are explosive blasts of violence and distortion, while Underwater Boy and Alien Love Call show this hazy psychedelic dream pop sound that somehow never feels out of place. The guitar riffs are all fantastic and perfectly shift in tone throughout the record. The usage of synths, weird electronic sounds, as well as vocal manipulation add this unique and experimental flavour that never gets boring. Brendan Yates's vocals are all fantastic and drenched in large amounts of reverb, making vocal lines like the shouted chorus in Mystery or the melodic crooning in Fly Again sound huge and epic in scope. The record has shown some of the best production work I heard on a record this year, and the idea to hire Mike Elizondo, which I definitely pronounced completely wrong there, who is best known for his work in the rap genre, I think was a fantastic decision. Every song on Glow On feels fresh every time I hear it. It's a masterclass on how to make heavy music that sounds new and exciting. It's easily the best album in the genre this year, and one that I fall deeper in love with the more I listen to it.
Rise and shine, let's get it. Bomber car, dickhead. I used to jack cars with a
Easily the best hip-hop album I heard all year. Slow Tie's sophomore record Tyron is a triumph of UK hip-hop and one of the best albums the scene has produced in over the past decade. Building upon the ideas and sounds he developed on his debut, Tyron is a double album with each side being vastly different to the other. Side 1 delivers that same level of aggression as the debut, with that rough blend of grime and punk delivered with this strong, snotty and whiny quality, and the other half shows Slow Tie show a much more emotionally charged, introspective side. The album is far more mature and confessional than anything he's done before. Feel Away shows him recovering post-breakup and reflecting on what he could have done differently and the growth he still needs to make as a person. It features James Blake, who delivers some of the most beautiful and catchy vocal lines on the entire record. The album closer ADHD is similarly dark and emotional, discussing his struggles with ADHD and how people didn't believe in it when he was a kid and thought he just wanted attention. But on the other side of the coin, there are songs like Cancelled featuring Skepta, which shows them tackling cancel culture and how it doesn't allow people to grow and improve. Slow Tie's writing and vocal deliveries are incredible throughout the record, with him balancing humour and darkness in an incredibly powerful way. The production work is great also, with every single beat on the record being memorable and never too complex or overly produced. Many of them are basic and bare, but it still allows Slow Tie's vocals to become the main focus. If you're a fan of British hip hop and are still sleeping on Slow Tie, this is the perfect album to get into him with. Here is another album I was not expecting to love as much as I did. Although I liked the first Church's album, bar the singles from the other two records, I've not really loved anything they've done since. But with this album, the band completely reinvent their image and reinvigorate their sound without ever completely changing. The band's signature synth pop style is still very much here, but the band take heavy influence from 80s horror scores. The promotional material surrounding the album plays up to this horror influence also, and while much of the music on the album sounds like it could have been on any of the band's previous records, there are many moments where the horror influence is shown heavily. How Not to Drown is a goth pop song, for example, that answers the question, what if Churches made Disintegration by The Cure? It features an irresistibly catchy hook, which is one of the best hooks on the record, and the feature from Robert Smith sells this gothic sound, and he works perfectly as vocalist Lauren Mayberry's opposite. They sound incredible together, and despite their clashing accents, they managed to harmonize with each other beautifully. He Said, She Said, Final Girl and Lullabies all have the super sickly bright melodic sound you'd expect from Churches, but blended in with John Carpenter-esque synth sounds. The production and instrumentation take these catchy, bright pop songs and adds an incredibly dark and sinister feel to them. The lyrics are incredibly dark and personal, addressing feelings of loneliness and self-doubt. Final Girl shows Mayberry relating to women's place in horror movies and how having eyes on her constantly led her to question whether she should stay a performer and whether she should have altered herself. Much of the album seems to show Mayberry confronting the horror of being a woman in the 21st century, especially one in the music industry, and the way the band weave horror imagery into their lyrics add an incredibly visceral and gloomy edge to the songs. This is easily the most exciting, fun, and darkly interesting record they've ever made, and I honestly would go as far to say it's their best album yet. I hope more bands blend horror elements into their music, because I think the two kind of weirdly go hand in hand.
I can feel the storm, I can feel it coming on, I can feel my heart.
Tiger Cub's debut record was one of my favourite albums of 2016, and I was a big fan of everything they'd done before that also. I saw them live for the second time in 2018, a gig that I still hold as one of my favourite gigs I've ever been to. But after that show, they just kind of vanished without a trace. I assumed that, like many bands do, they couldn't afford to keep it up and just decided to move on and do different things. However, in early 2021, they just appeared out of nowhere again with a new song, album announcement and tour announcement. At first I was kind of underwhelmed by this album and thought although it was good, it was nothing compared to their debut. However, after repeated listens, I fell in love with this record. This album is far more accessible than their previous record while still delivering exactly what you'd expect from the band. In many ways, it's as if their debut was In Utero and this new album is Nevermind. It's still that fuzzy, gritty blend of grunge and blues rock, but far more melodic and cleaner. Songs like the title track and Beauty show the band heavier than ever with explosive alt metal riffs and giant choruses that feel written to fill stadiums. But then with Blue Mist in My Head and Stop Beating on My Heart, the band are at their catchiest with two of the most infectious hooks I heard all year. Both are filled with strong amounts of swagger and fuzz and show newfound confidence to the band. Where their previous music felt at times quite contained and anxious, with this record it seems like they found a large amount of confidence and are writing songs for larger audiences. The band's influence from Queens of the Stone Age is incredibly prevalent throughout as well, especially on songs like Sleepwalker, which sounds like a Songs for the Deaf outtake. But the band aren't afraid to head into darker and more somber territories throughout, which considering the hell they went through to make this album is pretty understandable. Funeral is a tender, mournful acoustic song about the loss of vocalist Jamie Hall's grandmother. It's heartbreaking and beautiful with a gorgeous string section later on in the track, and Built to Fool is a similarly mournful tribute to a friend they lost to suicide, which starts with an incredibly atmospheric blending of pianos and clean guitars before building into one of the most euphoric and loudest moments on the record. This album has sadly not gotten a lot of attention, which is a massive shame because it's a real masterpiece, and I think Tiger Cub are one of the most exciting bands in the UK rock scene. If you've never heard of them or this album, I highly recommend it. Back when I made my best albums of 2015, I put Wolf Alice's debut, My Love Is Cool, as my favourite album of the year. Granted, I hadn't heard To Pimp a Butterfly yet, and many of the albums on that list have gotten better with age, but I still really loved that record. But their sophomore album, Visions of a Life, left an incredibly sour taste in my mouth. Although I like the album far more now than upon release, I just didn't vibe with it at all, and both times I saw them on the subsequent tour, I was incredibly disappointed. So despite liking the pre-release singles for this album, I still went in not expecting it to be that much, but I was incredibly pleasantly surprised with the final result. Blending the more experimental sound of their sophomore album with the shoegaze-tinged folk rock of the debut, the album sounds like the band trying to make the definitive Wolf Alice album. The instrumentation is luscious and beautiful, employing beautiful dream pop sounding synthesizers, organs, mellotrons, and the band's signature effect-heavy guitars. Songs like Lipstick on the Glass and No Hard Feelings are some of the most gorgeous pop songs I heard all year and are among the best songs the band have ever written. Safe from Heartbreak shows the band embracing their earlier folk sound with incredibly beautiful fingerpicked guitars and Ellie Rousel singing about a relationship falling apart and isolating herself from the possibility of falling in love again. Many of the songs have a super melancholic yet anthemic sound, including The Last Man on Earth, which sounds like it could have come from X and Y by Coldplay. But the band also embraced that hard rock sound of many of their hits, including on the track Smile, which blends grunge with dreamy shoegaze in the most exciting and anthemic way possible, as well as the Riot Girl inspired Play the Greatest Hits, which shows a musician losing themselves in music to numb their emotions post breakup. The album feels like the band are completely reinvigorated and more passionate than ever. They're constantly at their best, using music as a way to heal themselves and others. It's quite possibly the band's best album to date and makes me incredibly excited for their next record. So we're gonna blast through a few honourable mentions now, but before jumping in I just want to preface by saying that none of these albums are mediocre or just okay. These are all albums that I really liked, but for one reason or another I just didn't like as much as the 30 I picked. There are also a couple on there that I only got around to listen to once or only heard recently and might have been on the actual list had I listened to them a bit more, but maybe I didn't have time to re-listen to them or I just didn't feel the urge for some reason, so bear that in mind. These are all really good albums, none of them are bad or even like just okay, they're all really good. Let's just jump into them. Inspired by Bowie's Let's Dance album, Medicine at Midnight shows Diffuse blending their usual blend of alt rock and classic rock with elements of power pop and dance rock. Greg Kurstin's production style finally feels at home with a bigger emphasis on Rami Jaffe's keyboards as well as orchestral sounds and a choir of backing vocalists. The album is very funky and groovy and there are definitely moments that sound like classic Foo Fighters, but it's really interesting to see the band this late in their career actually taking a risk after a couple albums of just kind of doing the same shit again. This album I wouldn't say is a gigantic return to form, and honestly it's still nowhere near as good as most of their pre-Sonic Highways output, but it's definitely a solid step in the right direction. It's probably their best album since Wasting Light at least, but fuck Shame Shame and Waiting on a War, those songs are absolute deep dog shit. Angels and Airwaves were one of my big teenage bands, a band that I loved as a teen, but as I grew older I massively grew out of them. However, when Alan Rubin joined the band as Tom DeLonge's main collaborator, the material they made got far better. Their last album, The Dreamwalker, is great, so I was very excited for this one. The album is stylistically more diverse than anything they've previously done. There's a great blending of that classic space rock sound of their early stuff, 90s alt rock and 80s synth pop. The production work and instrumentation are great, and there are plenty of super infectious and catchy melodies. The album is just massively brought down by DeLonge's at times cringy lyrics that show he hasn't really grown at all as a songwriter. I think I prefer The Dreamwalker, but I can't deny just how good this album is. Far better than anything Blink-182 have done in almost 2 decades at least. Twin Shadow's self-titled record is certainly a lot of fun. Embracing soul and punk sounds, the album isn't a super far step away from its usual style of synth pop, indie pop, but it goes into some new territories. Much of the songs are incredibly catchy, well written and filled with great production work. At one point this album was actually pretty high on the list, however the more I listened to it the less I got from it. There's a lot of really great stuff here, but a lot of it is pretty repetitive, but it's still a fun listen, and clocking in at 31 minutes, it's a small commitment.
I'm making plans for the day I love this is true.
Sympathy for Life feels like the perfect progression for Parquet Courts. Exploring more of the dance, punk and garage rock sound of their previous couple records, the album sees them playing around with a wider sonic palette than ever before. It may not be quite as exciting and catchy as Wide Awake, but for me it's still great to see the band haven't slowed down.
3 uncles of old Sonny Boy, backed only by accordion. 3 rows of pale brunettes.
This album proves that Black Midi are one of the most electrifying, exciting and unique rock bands around today. Just as experimental or strange as their debut, this record is somehow both more melodic and more chaotic than their previous album. It really builds upon what I think makes that album great while being equally fresh and different. Had I listened to the album more, I would have loved it more than I do, I think, but sadly I only got the chance to listen to it once and it hasn't really stuck in my mind super well, but I will re-listen to it at some point and hopefully I'll love it even more.
I got myself together, I got myself in check, I made myself remember.
2020's Ultra Mono was basically Idles making a greatest hits of sorts, creating an album that encapsulated much of the sound of their first 2 albums while trying a few new things here and there. At the time it felt derivative despite the high quality of songwriting. However, when Crawler was released, it became very clear that the intention was to cap off chapter 1 of the band so they could start chapter 2. Crawler still encapsulates what you'd expect from Idles. Songs like The Wheel, The New Sensation, Sensation, Cruel, and Meds aren't super far removed from their previous work, but in instances like MTT420RR, Car Crash, The Beachland Ballroom, and Progress, they completely reinvent themselves. Far more personal and darker than any of their previous records, Crawler is a visceral, rough, and noisy beast. The record steps away from the attitude-filled, politically charged rage of their previous work and instead delves into themes of addiction and mental illness. Frontman Joe Talbot openly sings about his struggles with addiction and how it almost destroyed him and everything around him. The Beachland Ballroom is a soul song inspired by an incredibly dark moment in Talbot's life in which he felt completely lost and had to get through it. The glitchy electronic track Progress shows him coming to terms with being in a self-destructive cycle and not wanting to face the consequences of it. So much of the album is emotionally destructive and hold incredible weight. Talbot trades comedic catchphrases for deep, resonant stories. Musically, the band are at the top of their game. Mark Bowen and Lee Cannon delve into completely fresh and uncharted territories with their guitar sounds, using vast amounts of effects and playing techniques to create something that sounds unlike anything else. The production work from Bowen and Kenny Beats is incredible, making the album sound super unique and interesting. There's never a dull moment on Crawler. The ferocity and magnetic energy has never been more heightened. Where before the messages of the music have been about unity or making a change to make the world a better place, this album is all about retrospection and self-growth. It's an album that I needed last year and affected me deeper than anything else I heard all year. The band not only feel recharged, but they feel more passionate than ever. This is one of the most explosive, exciting, yet emotionally poignant albums I heard all year, and I cannot recommend it enough. It may not be quite as great as Joy is an Act of Resistance for me, but it's really not far off. And there we go, 2021 is over and it's time to experience another year of music. I apologize this video took so long to make. January has been an incredibly hectic month. I will be doing a best films of 2021 video very soon, so keep an eye for that. I have a lot planned this year I want to do, so fingers crossed I get to make it all happen, unlike last year where I think I probably got to do about 20% of what I wanted to do. Thank you for watching to the end of the video, and I'll see you very soon.